As Bogey might have put it, of all the planes in all the world, he had to fly in mine. And the owners of the King Air in between Barry and George W. Bush all had ties to the Bush family and were involved in some of the most notorious and unpunished financial frauds of the 1980s. And this one King Air reveals, like nothing else we've seen, the bipartisan nature of this scandal. We discovered a note in Barry Seal's own handwriting, revealing that the man who originally gave this plane to Seal was a close associate of Charles Manat, the national chairman during the early 80s of the Democratic Party. We remembered a curious incident from the 1984 Democratic Convention when Walter Mondale, the party's presidential nominee, was prevented from choosing his own man as party chairman, the presidential candidate's traditional prerogative. They wouldn't let him replace Charles Manat.
When the Democratic Convention was called to order this afternoon, the gavel was in the hands of Democratic National Committee Chairman Charles Manat. As party chairman, the job of calling the convention to order was rightfully his. As Sandra Van Oker reports, over the weekend, the job very nearly went to someone else.
The formalities began smoothly enough. But behind the facade, there was discord. The result of Walter Mondale's attempt this weekend to dump Californian Charles Manat as National Party chairman and replace him with Georgia State Chairman Burt Lance. When reaction from party leaders was so fiercely negative, Mondale backed off.
Could Manat have been just too good a fundraiser to be replaced? Oil companies, we've learned, make excellent drug money laundering vehicles. Sources told us that this man, Democratic power broker Richard Benveniste, had incorporated a Trinity Oil or Trinity Energy to launder money for his client, Barry Seal. This gray-haired lawyer is the same man who defended Bill Clinton on the Whitewater Committee, the same committee which was haunted by the ghost of Barry Seal, according to the Wall Street Journal. We discovered that back in the early 80s, he represented both Barry Seal and Bill Clinton. We found an oil company called Trinity Energy that was sold by Barry's partner, attorney Michael Roy Fugler, for $22 million to a shadowy company suspected of being controlled by none other than Arkansas kingpin Jackson Stevens. We also traced to Trinity Energy, a Delaware-listed company, to the phone number of a company formed by former Pentagon officials called ICF Kaiser International, whose chairman, a man who had sat on its board for over 9 years, was former Congressman Tony Coelho, who resigned from Congress rather than face an ethics probe.
Congressional Democrats awoke to even more unexpected headlines today. The number 3 man in the House leadership, California Congressman Tony Coelho, has also decided to quit. Deborah Potter has our report.
It was a stunning surprise. The number 3 Democrat in the House, Tony Coelho, calling it quits rather than face a protracted investigation of his financial dealings.
Today, Tony Coelho was the head of Al Gore's presidential campaign. Why would Gore put someone so tainted in so visible a position? Maybe Coelho's good at fundraising too. Just how deep does this scandal go? A block off Bourbon Street in New Orleans is Royal Street, since the 1830s home to pricey galleries and antique shops. This elegant gallery belongs to a man named Dave Dixon, known as one of Louisiana's most prominent citizens, an intimate of governors for decades. Dixon is locally revered as the father of the Louisiana Superdome. And for decades, this man, Dave Dixon, was also the CIA handler of the person known as the most successful drug smuggler in American history, Barry Seal. And at the trial of Clay Shaw, the only man ever charged in the murder of our president, Dave Dixon was a character witness for the accused. But the truly saddest part of this whole scandal is the way our free press has looked the other way. They called Seal's killing a gangland-style murder, but Barry Seal was not murdered by the Medellin cartel. The cover story that Jorge Ochoa, head of the cartel, caused Seal to be murdered in a contract killing is as much a big lie as anything ever churned out of Nazi propaganda mills during World War II. Incredibly, we discovered that on the night Barry Seal was slain, 3 other top lieutenants of the Medellin cartel were also murdered.
Our lead story, Metro News has uncovered some new information in the investigation into the assassination of Barry Seal. Reporter Dana Kay has the story.
Metro News has learned that There were a total of 4 drug-related killings the same day Barry Seal was gunned down here in Baton Rouge. And all of them seem to have been connected to the same drug ring operated out of Colombia. Metro News reported last night that a Colombian named Pablo Carrera was shot and killed in Colombia the same night Barry Seal was gunned down in Baton Rouge by a professional hit squad. Carrera was identified as the number 2 man in the Colombian drug organization headed by Jorge Ochoa. Metro News has now learned that 2 other Ochoa associates were shot to death at the same time. Another Colombian, Pablo Achilla, was executed in Colombia, and the 4th Ochoa associate to die was a woman identified only as Barbara. She was killed in Miami.
Who killed Seal? Just 10 days before he died, in a typical display of the fearlessness for which he was justly famous, he threatened to expose the gun running and drug smuggling that flourished in Mena, Arkansas. The man he threatened, then Vice President George Bush. All 3 of the guys on trial, Richard Sharpstein, the Miami attorney for one of the Colombians convicted, told us, all told their attorneys that once they reached the U.S., their actions were directed by a military officer, whom they very quickly figured out to be Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Barry Seal died for a simple reason, a reason which redeems him somewhat in our eyes. He was getting ready to talk. There's more, much more, to this story than we have time for here. It's in our book, Barry and the Boys. And a full airing of the Mena drug scandal can be found in our 2-hour special, The Secret Heartbeat of America. You can receive either or both by priority mail by calling the phone number shown at the end of this show. But we want to close with something we heard from someone who was just a small child when JFK was murdered, his son John. At a press conference announcing George magazine, he was asked if he would use his new publication to probe his father's assassination. No, he said, too much time has passed for anything effective to be done. Time, he said, is the great enemy of the truth.
The story is true.
The 1980s was a decade worthy of its name. It stood for a span of time with a unifying, coherent philosophy, which we all more or less shared. In the 80s, it was morning in America.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
And morning in America sounded good, but proved to be a false dawn, fueled by junk bonds and government debt. And when the market crashed, the junk dealers on Wall Street began to look a lot like the crack entrepreneurs, devastating the inner cities. The 1980s represented a huge U-turn for a lot of people, and a descent into a crack cocaine-induced nightmare from which many will never awake. Something happened in America in the 1980s, something not yet fully understood, but seen in outline by almost everyone. The growth of a multi-billion-dollar drug trade with the power to create narco-democracies everywhere its tentacles spread. And they spread a lot of places, even here. In the land where the palm trees kiss the tangerine sunsets 365 days in a row, Los Angeles, California. So we begin our story of the drugging of America here in Los Angeles. Hello, and welcome to Conspiracy, The Secret History. My name is Daniel Hopsicker, and I'll be your guide tonight on our journey to the secret heartbeat of America. We're in Los Angeles because what happened in Los Angeles happened in hundreds of other American cities in the 80s. But because it's Los Angeles, it happened bigger. Everything is bigger here. The money, the cars, the houses, the drugs, especially the drugs. Until recently, Los Angeles looked to many observers like the capital of the future. Then drugs began to destroy whatever social stability existed here. Admittedly, never much. This is a company town, a factory town, the manufacturing home of America's second leading export, the moving word, movies. Then crack came to town and everything changed. The results are everywhere around us. Every one of these faces is an MIA in the longest and most costly war this country has ever fought. A war that's already lasted twice as long as Vietnam. A war that cost us way over $16 billion a year, even though nobody thinks we've got a prayer of winning it.
Of course, the name of this war is as familiar to every American as the names of our family, friends, and neighbors that have been lost in it. It's called the war on drugs. Tonight we're going to see evidence that it just might be an utter sham.
Since crack came to town in the middle 80s, there have been persistent reports that the Contras and the CIA were somehow involved in it. So we begin our story about drugs in the American way in an unlikely place, here in San Jose, California, with the controversial series Dark Alliance, the story behind the crack explosion in the San Jose Mercury News, written by Gary Webb. His series linked the explosive growth in the market for crack cocaine to the shadowy funding of the Contras back in the middle 80s, remember? Iran-Contra, selling guns to the Ayatollah.
Incentives to make that February transaction work. And the attractive incentive for me was the one he made, that residuals could flow to support the Nicaraguan resistance.
That was the Iran part of the Iran-Contra equation. Many people felt it scandalous to be selling weapons to people who were directly responsible for the deaths of 251 of our fellow countrymen in Lebanon. A few even called it treasonous. Webb's story raised the frightening picture of out-of-control elements of our nation's covert intelligence agencies peddling drugs like an army of Ivy League superflies. In places like Los Angeles, the effects are still being felt.
And it's on these city streets that the drugs, the crack, ended up. The gangs in Los Angeles distributed crack cocaine to over 110 American cities that had never seen or heard of the drug before. And today, 10 years after the Nicaraguan Contra war is over, the crack is still here.
Today, cynicism over this fact in the African-American community is, to say the least, widespread.
To be black in America, we the janitors. So black folks grow up knowing stuff. And so we've been knowing this. I mean, we say it in our nice little way where we say we don't have planes, we can't laundry money. You know, it's hard for a black person to get a check cashed in their own bank. And so how we going to laundry drug money? So what's amazing to us and what makes us feel good is white America now is beginning to see what we've been knowing all along.
I was catapulted into this issue because of my shock and outrage at the idea that government could have anyway been involved with the trafficking of drugs in this country. I think it is one of the most outrageous kinds of undermining of the citizens of this country that could have ever occurred.
So tonight, we're asking questions about the almost taboo subject of the drugging of America. Who profits? Who's responsible? Who benefits? Follow the money went the refrain during Watergate. Tonight, that's what we're going to do.